So welcome to everyone to this event today, March 21st, Earth Matters with Jamie McHugh. And I'm Viviana Padenes. I'm a member of his Matter Board. I'm from Spain, and I'm doing things internationally. I've been working for his Matter, serving for more than 6 years. So I'm very excited to be here with you today. I like to present you Jamie McHugh for the ones that you don't know him. And Jamie, he's a master somatic movement educator and creator of somatic expression, body wisdom for modern minds. He's a long-term member of his meta who generously has created this series of ecosomatics and podcasts, Earth Matters. Ecosomatics in the Anthropocene. Sorry for my English. Okay, so today episode is number 5, and Jamie has some guests. So I let you introduce your guests. Thank you, Jamie, for your generosity to having this time to share your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone for today's session.
Thank you, Viviana. I am just going to change my, there, here we are. So this series has been a labor of love and dedication and necessity for me in counteracting what I would call that general malaise, disappointment, anger, sadness about what's happening to our planet. The dysregulation of our planetary body has amazing kind of trickle effects through every aspect of not only human culture, but the more than human world that is also impacted by our actions. So the intention of these conversations was to stimulate dialogue between our community, is meta, and the larger world, and find ways that many different points of view could collaborate, because underneath our field, informing our field, is this idea of movement. We are somatic movement professionals. Movement, the embodied life, is what it's going to require for everyone to step up and be involved in the greater turning of the wheel. Because where we're at this moment in time is our let's leave it to the experts is not going to get us anywhere. In fact, most of our corporate strategies for clean energy are really not taking into account the larger body of the earth and all of its creatures. So in terms of ecosomatics as a discipline, part of what's important is not only taking action, but also letting that action reverberate in our own ecosystem, to understand ourselves not as casually walking through the planet as if it is a backdrop for our dramas, but that the planet is part of our embodied experience. And my guests up to this point have been people in various ways who have been using their skills and their calling to address these issues. My guests last episode, Paula Joseph Jones and Victoria Moyer, were really focusing on the more than human world. Paula in her work and avocation with horses, and really using horses as co-participants in helping her clients move through trauma. And Victoria with her work with native plant species and her dedication to rewilding landscapes. And so it made sense to me as we were kind of following this trajectory. Different people have found different ways of bringing themselves into action, that it made sense to tune into the human experience. And how do we face and deal with climate anxiety, with all the different states of mind and feeling that we go through in literally facing this, as opposed to putting it out of sight, out of mind. And so I was really happy to invite Laura Schmidt, who I met a couple of years ago at the Holos Eco-Psychology Conference, and her Good Grief Network, which I absolutely love because, of course, us Charlie Brown fans and Peanuts fans know Good Grief. And so I love the sense of humor and that little tweak that's to make people pay attention, and all the work that her and her partner have created over these years. And to have her here in relationship to Stefanie Cohen, who I met many years ago in LA at SomaFest, and been on her mailing list and know the work she's doing with authentic movement and body mind centering, and really starting to focus in on rituals about grief and despair, which I felt were very timely. So I'm interested in this interface between us in the conversation today of how do we encourage people to bring their experience forward, to articulate it, to get support, and to find other ways to channel the turbulence of all of this emotional body into action, into what I would call the abundance and generosity of showing up, paying attention, and taking action. And so in our conversation today, we'll explore these themes. And what I want to say, first of all, is thank you for showing up. That's the first step. So I appreciate your coming and being witnesses to what we have to offer. And I would just want to highlight, because we know that word witness from authentic movement, but many other disciplines, that witnessing is sometimes the most profound gift we can give one another, of being open to experience while simultaneously being inside our own embodied experience, to be in our breath, to be in our bones, and to be in the mutual dream time that's created when we show up together. So as we launch into this, Stefanie is going to begin with a somatic attunement for us before we move into conversation. So once again, thank you for showing up. And Stefanie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jamie and Bibiana, and thank you so much to all of you. I want to just clarify, Jamie, when you say BMC or body mind centering, it's in the very, very lowercase BMC. So I do work with experiential anatomy as part of my practice. And so I wanted to invite right now a practice that can be an invocation to us right now for this conversation, an invocation of safe enough-ty, of safe enough. Safe enough in our own selves, and indeed our own cells, and safe enough in exchange with one another and in our own environments. So I want to invite in a connection with the fluid systems, and in particular with the fluid inside our cells. Our bodies are over 70% water, and the vast majority of that the vast majority of that means it is in the fluid in each of our cells. And some of the qualities that fluid has is presence and an unhurriedness and a sense of home. So I'd love to invite us in whatever way is available to us right now to image our bodies as a complete sphere, and to feel in to the parts of our bodies that are making contact with a seat, making contact with the floor, to allow those parts of us to feel in to a sense of heaviness, and to receive the support of ground through those places of contact. And to take a breath or two, inviting in, receiving that contact, receiving that support of ground, of gravity. And then inviting the parts of us that are making contact with the air to feel into their lightness. And to experience a sense of spaciousness in between this ground and space. The fluid in our cells, allowing us to make contact with a sense of presence, with a sense of rest. The permeable membrane of a cell inviting in nourishment. In the case of our cells, in the process of receiving in oxygen. And those membranes also allowing out what is no longer of use, like carbon dioxide. Receiving and releasing. And then engaging with the environment just around the membrane of our bodies. Maybe the environment of this field that we're part of with one another, the environment of the rooms that we're in, and beginning to gently lean into that. So like a gentle pushing in and back, reaching out and back in, engaging as though with the intercellular fluid that is bathing and nourishing all of our cells, and feeling into a sponginess, a muscularity, a support that intercellular fluid offers. And that we can go back and forth inside the membrane into this place of rest, and outside to receive nourishment, to receive support, and to reincorporate that over and over again, receiving and releasing. Safe enough within myself, safe enough with you and in our conversation. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jamie.
Thank you.
Apologize, I got a little distracted by the chat for a moment there. There was a nice question, and I'm happy to reply to that later. But thank you.
Viviana, is there a way that you can highlight the three of us so that the three of us are all on the screen together?
Yes, just 1 second for today's participants. Don't use the chat right now. We will have an open space later for questions and for more information. So that will be important. Okay. Just 1 second.
We're trying to hold a space of one track attention. I know that's counterculture in these days of Zoom, but just so we can relax into the experience of the conversation for both speakers and witnesses. So is there a way to highlight the three of us so we can all be in the speaker view? Ah, I can pin you, and I can, oh, I see. I can only pin one person at a time.
I think what you're looking for is spotlight, not a pin. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Any help.
If you make me a co-host, I think I can do it.
Viviana, if you could make Laura a co-host, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
Ah, I'm spotlighted. Okay.
I'm trying.
Ah, there's Stefanie. Okay.
All right.
Yay. Yoo-hoo! Collaboration works. There's proof in the pudding. We can figure it out. Thank you. So, Stefanie, thank you for easing us into that. And I just noticed for myself the delicious quality of landing here with all of you, but in my own skin. And I'm curious, Laura, how it was for you, and just what it stimulated for you.
Yeah, a lot of gratitude. I spend most of my day kind of rushing to the next thing and my next obligation and the next email. And so even the words that you use, like the fluid in our cells have an unhurriedness, the invitation to like, I don't have anywhere else to be but right here and what's supporting me, and using the terms of like the liquid between our cells are creating this sort of like structure. Like I don't have to do the holding is here. I thought that was a pretty profound invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Beautiful. I loved your reflections. Thank you. And just to kind of follow with that, I know that in our initial conversation, you had mentioned that you've begun to kind of broaden your perspective in the work you're doing with your interest in somatics and a somatic certificate that you got. And so maybe to begin with, if you could just tell us a little bit about Good Grief Network, just the kind of the what's the words, the nuts and bolts of kind of the overview of that, and that what you discovered and how the somatic piece is informing the trajectory of the work with Good Grief.
Yeah, I come into this world with complex PTSD, and so have a lot of personal trauma and tried very hard to keep my inner world and my outer world separate. I studied biology and environmental studies, and, you know, as an early 20-something, learned the severity of what we're facing collectively. So then I tried activism and advocacy, and, you know, tried a lot of those paths that led me straight to burnout because I was neglecting this inner world that needed the attention and the resiliency. And what ended up happening was I was a student in the environmental humanities program at the University of Utah, and was given a couple of years to kind of explore whatever I wanted. And that's where I really put the pieces together of the inner work and the outer work, and how critical it is to have them both married. You know, the inner work informs the outer work. And then I got to ask questions like, what does resilience even mean? And what might be a pathway to resilience? And so ended up laying out what was a sort of 9-step pathway. It's now 10 steps. And then my wife and I, Amy Lewis Rowe, kind of created structure around this pathway, and put it into a meeting format. And we call it 10 Steps to Resilience and Empowerment in a Chaotic Climate. And then to house that program, we created a nonprofit, which is Good Grief Network. And what's really beautiful is Good Grief Network has expanded to many different types of offerings. The original 10-step program is still running, but we now also have a teen resiliency program. We call that GGNZ. That's a 5-week program. It's a lot more experiential and helps people identify their resources. We teach people how to facilitate these sharing spaces, and these spaces to bear witness to each other and to get real about it, as adaptation professional Susie Moser invites us to. And then we host like a journaling program as well for the folks who kind of want to dig into the subject matter, but maybe can't do it in a live session or a live meeting. And all of these things, I think, are invitations for us to get back into our bodies, because it's so easy to think. It's not easy. That was the wrong word. Let me try again. We are conditioned to think about the problems and to create solutions to all the problems that are facing us in the state of the world with our minds only. And yet we're like cutting out half of the wisdom by not doing it with our bodies. We run from sensations because they're scary. We're told that we're only supposed to bring positive vibes. We're only supposed to feel the good things. But what if grief and despair and rage and hopelessness, what if those can be teachers too? And in order for them to be teachers, you have to be embodied. And so part of Good Grief's mission is to remind people that we're not just thinking machines, we're deeply feeling machines. And in order to connect, in order to heal, we have to get back into our bodies, because that's the place of connection.
Wow. As I'm listening to you, I'm very impressed with the different iterations of the work, how it's clearly still evolving, and I feel the immediacy and the intensity of your mission, and so I'm aware what in all of this, and having that very strong mission, where do you find, I would call them moments of grace, of repose, of equalizing out the very strong mission?
Yeah. I'm thinking 3 things. One is being in conversation with other people who want to face the grief, who want to face the despair and move through it. Being a biology student, environmental studies student, I was inundated by the problems and just started to think like, oh, can we even make it through this? What are the trajectories forward? And started to really feel that hopelessness. But when you meet with other people who are willing to be in it with you and bear witness and hold the questions without rushing to solve them, I think that creates inspiration. I think that creates that moment of solace of like, I'm not the only one who sees this. I'm not the only one who's grappling with this. And what if we grapple with it together? So I think that's the first thing, is just being with other people who are willing to face it. And then the next 2 are about being in the more than human world. I love water. So as often as possible, I can try to find a river. If I'm fortunate enough to be traveling the ocean, I'd love to be near the ocean and just be with the ocean. And then a garden. I like to garden. I like to see things grow, because I think that it brings me to the present moment and noticing. Plants have so much wisdom, and they're not like what's my life going to be like in a week? Will there be enough resources? Will there be enough water? They're just concerned about right now, I have the nutrients I need, I have the water I need, and they're constantly changing. There's new growth every day. And so I think it's a model for me, who's a highly anxious person, to be like, can I be a little bit more like this plant? Can I just be with what is right here? And then tomorrow I'll make sure I have some water to be able to grow.
Beautiful. Thank you. I have a lot of responses to that, but I want to bring Stefanie into the conversation, particularly in relationships, being with other people, bearing witness. And if you could speak a bit about your work with despair, anxiety, and kind of rituals that and body work that brings people into the present moment of their feelings.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Laura. Such rich work. Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, really kind of since the beginning of my somatic journey, I guess, or my consciously aware of my somatic journey, grief and certainly despair that comes with that, and embodiment have really moved with one another all along the way. So just to kind of maybe go back to some roots, discovering, just discovering, but receiving authentic movement as a discipline toward the tail end of the time that I was in college. That and some other somatic practice really informing the performance art that I was making, finding a body, finding myself in my body in ways that I hadn't consciously had access to or allowed prior to that. And early in my 20s, doing work as a hospice home health aide. So, I mean, there were experiences around grief, certainly throughout my childhood, but having an opportunity to really see the resource that embodied practice, and in that case in particular, both the experience of being moved by my body in authentic movement, again, allowing the experiences that I was having, working with people, working with their families, allowing those experiences to move through me and not get lodged in me. But also as a witness in that practice, really coming to hear, to discern what it was that was being asked of me, how I was really being asked to serve versus what I was projecting on people's experience. Those pieces supported me to really provide care in a way that was, I think, more profoundly useful, and also to be able to integrate, experience and to allow for the creative kind of seeds of those things to then be moved into art making. So currently, fast forward a lot of decades at this point, offering ongoing authentic movement groups and individual somatic therapy work, but in particular some workshops and some series that support us in helping to metabolize some grief and even some terror, to be honest. Helping to, again, to begin to metabolize those experiences so that they don't get turned inward, or very importantly, don't get turned outward into violence and destruction, which is certainly we're bearing witness to on a grand scale at the moment. I asked you, Jamie, to make sure to ask me questions if I'm not sticking to the prompt. So.
I'm moving with the fluid systems, and as I'm moving with the fluid systems, kind of feeling into some of the touchstones along the way that you've brought forward. And part of it is this idea of being a witness, and how being a witness can serve other people, but also serves our own being, because we are able to, in a sense, I like to think of it sometimes as sitting in my bones, so I can kind of witness the passing show, what's moving through. So having the solidity as well as the fluidity to hold experience, and how that really requires pausing. I would say that is in a world that is charged up and is anxious. Of course, anxiety and fear can generate a lot of manic action. And it's like, how do we pause, stop, notice, feel, slow down the frequency to come into contact with what's really important, and then bring that forward.
Indeed.
Laura, it looks like you're percolating with something.
I love the idea of pausing, noticing, and feeling. I'm just repeating what you're saying because it's profound, but you need that process or a practice in order to notice what's really going on. And I think that that's also where grief is. Like, we want to kind of push through grief or ignore our grief or hope that it'll go away with time, but it's here and it's waiting to be discovered. And unless you do what you just said, this pausing, slowing down, noticing, and then bringing it forward, I think we skip those last few steps because of this rush, because of the frenzy, because of our own fear of our feelings, but also like the cultural acceptance that we don't really have to touch our grief and we ought not. And it really resonated with like, you got to do the work to get to notice what's here and then bring that forward. I think that was the framing of it was really helpful.
And then in turn, in order to be able to really access joy, we need to lean in to her, with her sister. So grief and joy, grief and love, as really being the price of one another, or the gift of one another.
And that wide acceptance of the whole package. So, for example, there was and I noticed you liked it too, Laura, the other day on LinkedIn. Somebody posted that big post about collapse, and it was all this stuff about collapse that we're facing. And he was really pushing this idea that, research has shown you just really got to make people terrified to get their attention. And I wrote a response to that, and I was like, well, from my perspective, the function of fear is to stop movement. And then we carry on because we have different choices. If we get stuck in the paralysis, not a good place to be. But the function of fear is to stop movement. But then what? So if you just kind of keep people embedded in the fear, and all these things to, wake them up, I think it actually creates a counter effect. I think it's important to embrace the full range of feelings, because otherwise we become mired down in our own process, and then the action can't really go anywhere that's useful. So
yeah, it's making me think that once we hold the fear, in good grief, we would say accept the severity of the predicament, which can be fearful. You need to have an avenue to move that fear, right? Because if it seems like you can't do anything or you don't have any agency, you can't move, you can't run, you're stuck, then of course it's going to become immobilizing. You can't do anything. And that's a really hard place to be. And I think Stefanie named this earlier, but if we can't be with our internal experience and there's no place to process it to or move toward, then that's where the physical harm comes in. That's where we externalize these experiences onto others or those who we perceive as others, because it's intolerable to keep those feelings to ourselves. And so if we're going to help people get to the stage of fear, what avenues do we have for them to process it and move through with some sort of acceptance or some sort of intentional action, so we're not keeping everybody stuck?
yeah.
And the work that you're doing, Laura, and the work that I'm doing with collaborators and with groups is so much in support of belonging, like doing it all in community in some way, shape, or form. Community with other humans, community with the more than human world. And it's that disconnectedness from ourselves, that disconnectedness from our bodies, that disconnectedness from earth, that disconnectedness from others, that is such an incredible source of grief and such an incredible source of longing, and despair, I would say. And it's so important to be able to feel ourselves with others, and to be able to dare to do some of the work that you're describing, to dare to do that, in good company. So that
daring, I think that daring, I would also say, is part of our work as movement people, which is to really bring the body more forward into the conversation. For example, even fear, right? As we know, fear as a constrictor, and fear, how do we consciously embody fear through our neuromuscular system and release it and titrate it and play with it, and to realize that our agency that comes from voluntary action can sow the seeds for more permissiveness in entertaining all of these different emotions, right? Because we just know in Western culture, at least, our particularly American culture, the way that our emotional life has been sequestered, in pursuit of goals and this and that, the other thing, but kind of the emotional intelligence quotient has really lagged far behind in our education. So how to begin to experience the manifestations of emotions through the soma. And by having that kind of agency, like in the work of Stanley Kellerman, how do you really bring that to a place and then dissolve, bring it and dissolve, and to really notice in that range of experience how to relate to those feelings.
Yeah, and to that, to being able to expand into or flow between and among all of these different aspects or capacities with regard to emotion, that's where for me, I said, you know, body mind centering with lowercase, meaning that I'm not certified in body mind centering, but the experiential anatomy inquiries, and in particular, the fluid systems are a favorite for me. They are, I find them so resourcing in the sense that that my body is inherently made up of multiple strategies to thrive, and multiple sort of ways of being. So I might think of myself as one as shy and retiring, for instance, but you know, my arterial blood flow, you know, the qualities of that would, you know, would lead me to understand the ways in which I can be forthright and powerful, or you know, lymphatic, you know, with my lymph, I can be clear and crisp, and I can be boundaried, and synovial fluid, I can be playful and lighter. And so there are all of these things available to me. And also, this too shall pass, without a doubt. Like the fluidity, this, you know, it will be good, it will be positive, it will be rewarding, my experience, and then something's going to shift, and it's not going to be that way. And then something's going to shift again, and it's not going to be that way. So having those resources to draw on that connect me in, I am interconnected with Earth in that way.
And all those kind of qualities that you're referencing in relationship to BMC, and I'll use capital letters, but I'm not certified, but I'll use capital letters to honor the tradition. But that all of that is reflected back from the environment. So we can source that from within, or we can source it from without. That the movement of clouds in the sky, if I really bring my attention to that, right? For me, it's the same quality as cerebrospinal fluid. So that the medicine that is available is internal and external. And so our efforts on behalf of the earth to steward the earth, to protect the earth, we're really protecting ourselves. We're really stewarding ourselves, and vice versa. It's that reciprocity between the two that I think is important, because we all know so much of the talk about planetary dysregulation can get very cerebral and out of balance with our everyday lives. So how, as a discipline, do we remember that inner and outer reciprocity? Laura, I know you have some ideas.
I might turn us in a different direction, because I'm thinking about those of us living in these systems that are exploitative and oppressive in many ways, and impacting people who have different levels of privilege and marginalization. That trauma looks differently for a lot of us. And if you're constantly in that trauma response or the survival responses, how do you know that these resources are available? You know, like maybe you don't have the capacity to even go looking for the fact that our inner and our outer are always available for us. Like, how do you normalize that there are other ways of being, when for some populations the trauma just inundates, and it's there and it's there and it's there? You know, I think that in many ways, to to heal to have emotional intelligence, especially because it's not taught well in public schools and things like that. Like, it ends up being a privilege for those of us who maybe have the time or the energy or an access to a therapist or a healer in order to know these kinds of resources are available to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're talking about kind of reminds me of just an article I read the other day about an author named Tommy Orange, who I've never heard of before, but now I'm really curious to read his work. A Native American man who went to a school, I'm pretty sure it was in the Bronx, because their English teacher discovered that this guy was on book tour, and he had his students read his book, Tommy Orange's book. And so Tommy Orange came, talked to the students, and it was like, through the power of storytelling, these kind of different cultures were able to meet. And it was like the perseverance of that teacher to like go after him and to write a letter and say, you're a rock star with my kids. It would mean the world if you came and talked to them. And that the generosity of showing up and responding, paying attention. So in terms of, like you're saying, trauma and privilege, I think all of us, as we kind of move through our lives, there are these moments where there is the possibility to break through the veil and connect. Even in that brief moment of grace, something happens, right? Sometimes trauma, climate change, everything can feel so huge and overwhelming, privilege, inequality. And I think it's like, how do we scale it down to how we dance in our lives, how the dance of movement and stillness, paying attention three-dimensionally, noticing those moments of grace.
And to follow, part of what I'm hearing you say, Laura, is, you know, speaking to in the intense imbalance of privilege, and the context in which, you know, the context in which climate catastrophe, you know, have come about, all, you know, all of the isms, you know, that contribute to that, to also to be able to contextualize, the trauma of what feels to us to be individual, but is never so. It's never so. We're all just how we are operating within cultures, upon cultures and systems. And to be able to go back and forth between this more macro view of how we got here, and to how am I impacted within my body and bones right now. So historical and pervasive, and, you know, and ancestral. What's contributed. So I appreciate you naming that, Laura.
Well, and to further how we like can make things a bit more accessible to folks, I think it is this belonging. Like, we all want to be seen. We all want to know that another nervous system cares about us, and that we have a place to show up, whether we're messy or beautiful, or, you know, like, we have it together, we don't have it together. Like, we need places where we can fall apart together. And I think that this is where that group work comes into play, is yeah, a lot of us come preloaded with trauma, or a lot of us come because trauma has happened to us, because of situations of trauma everywhere. But how do we connect with each other in ways that can remind us of our humanity, and actually bring us that support and that attunement and that co-regulation that we so very much need? I think a lot of times, just like our pain and our sort of, you know, therapists call it negative feelings, but I don't like that, or negative emotions. We call them heavy and painful emotions, but we're taught to privatize them. We're taught to kind of keep that behind doors. You don't bring that into conversation. And what if we start undoing those things and bringing them to groups where we know that other people can hold our pain? And like, what kind of world would it be if we didn't have to have our shit together all the time, you know?
Amen.
Yeah, messy or beautiful, I would say messy beautiful. Make it one word. Yeah.
So I'm aware that we're starting to steer towards the end of the hour before we engage in conversation with people who show up who want to linger. It's more free form, but just to, if you were to kind of identify kind of just one action, one of the things I've noticed in this series is, besides having people speak from their experience of whatever they're doing, but something that they can encourage people to think of as an action they can take in this large field of how do we each find our own creative response and action to climate catastrophe. So while you're percolating on it, I was just going to say that the thing that I want to bring to attention to our witnesses today is community supported agriculture. That one of the big challenges we have is counteracting the corporate takeover of organic farming and the small family farms, the organic farms, who are tending to the soil, who are really working with the soil as it should be worked with for sustainability. And not only that, but creating wonderful food. Community supported agriculture, for those of you who don't know it, is basically an agreement that you make with the farmer that at the beginning of the growing season, I'm going to give you X number of dollars, and that therefore I'm investing in your success as a farmer. And that then we have, like, for example, our CSA, we have 24 weeks of fresh produce that begins in June. And there's CSAs all around the country, but that's one of the most direct ways to support the earth, the longevity of the earth. Our CSA also has, they're involved in, and I forget the program, but it's about equity and workers' rights, so that they're committed to paying a fair wage and making sure that food that's not used gets to food banks. So there's a way that this movement is way that any of us can kind of show up and support with our dollars something that's making a substantial contribution to the planet. So I will put in the chat the link to my CSA and also the link to the kind of the nationwide group. But if you don't know about them, it's amazing, and it's how we can each help the earth. So, Laura, or
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I was thinking that a really moving invitation for action would be to lean in to these heavy and painful feelings, because it requires a lot of courage. We can talk about it and we can say it's hard, but when you're actually with your grief or your despair or any overwhelming feelings, it can be a lot. And so I want to, one, honor that it takes courage, and two, maybe try to find a safe person or a safe enough person or animal companion or more than human world that you can share authentically these feelings with. And so kind of find a place to get it out of you and share it. But the second part, the sort of 1B of my invitation, is to also try to hold space for someone that you love without trying to fix them. Just be with them and just hold that space, because what I'm really getting out of our time together is the importance of bearing witness. And I love the invitation there to be with. And in Good Grief, we say often, be with, don't fix. Be with, don't fix. And my teacher, one of my teachers, Terry Tempest Williams, she often says, bearing witness is not a passive act. And I think in the dominant culture, we've been taught that bearing witness is indeed a passive act, but it's not. We're transformed by the stories. We're transformed by sharing ourselves, a piece of ourselves with other people. So I think that's my invitation for today.
Do you want to put your website into the chat as well?
Yeah, thank you. Can I put the social media handles as well?
Everything you like.
Okay, thank you.
Just so it's all there for everybody, and then people can save the chat, and yeah, it's all there. Stefanie.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So my invitation, action step invitation, and this, I think this, I'm imagining this as something that one could share or workshop with a friend or significant other. I'd like to share an invocation that that needed to write itself through me in order for me to remind myself of a connection to of a connection to historic indigeneity somewhere, as somebody who's part of Jewish diaspora and not having a sense of that connectedness, to really feel into a sense of belonging to and stewardship of Earth. And so I'm going to share this invocation, and maybe this will invite others to workshop their own. And so for me, this involves having my feet on the ground when that's available. And in Detroit in February, I feel that is not available as, as much. So to work with it creatively. Gratitude and blessings to the spirits of this place, its original and rightful stewards. May I learn to live in right relationship and do honor to you, your histories, and your descendants. Gratitude to the ancestors, to my ancestors, those well, bright, and vibrant in spirit, for your protection and your guidance, for your challenges and your gifts. May I continue to live into the talents, help to metabolize the burdens, and serve as a bright, loving face of our lineages with joy. Mm-hmm. And I want to name that ancestors can be ancestors of place, ancestors of traditions, ancestors of blood, ancestors of practices or resource. And that is my invitation.
And to close out our conversation before we go into open conversation, just to kind of give a sense of perspective, because I think perspective is so important in facing these challenging times, is to realize that the human presence on Earth has constantly run up against different crises of faith, different crises of scarcity, crises of not knowing. So I want to reaffirm the work that we're all doing with a quote from the mystic Hildegard of Bingen. We cannot live in a world that is not our own, in a world that is interpreted for us by others. An interpreted world is not a home. Part of the terror is to take back our own listening, to use our own voice, to see our own light. So that was, I think she's in the 1400s. So as I say, this is an ongoing struggle. And I think it's really important to not let others interpret for us, but to find our own. So I will put that in the chat as well, because I just think it's just so beautiful. And thank you. So now let's open it up. If you want to just jump in, unmute, if you want to say something, express something in response, or a question you might have, or a thought that's come to mind. So feel free to join the party.